Welcome to Life with Beth and Court,
where we teach you how to live authentically and build your best life.
one step at a time.
So, I can take the pop filter off this time?
If you keep that up, you can't.
I would like to.
Well, are you ready to listen to my suggestions?
It depends how many of them are there.
There's just two, really.
Okay, I'll consider it. Go ahead.
First of all, that's going to have to stop.
Oh, I don't ever do that, so I'm not sure what you're
Oh.
talking about.
You have this odd tick of going,
It's actually not.
and I can't even do it.
Excuse me. It's actually not a tick. If you would like to speak to my dental hygienist, I have overactive salivary glands, and there's a lot of spit floating
Well,
around
I'm going to
in
need
there.
your overactive salivary glands to not.
How do you
be
say salivary?
My mind was thinking ovary, which is not.
No.
I'm going to need your glands to stay away from the microphone. Because
they
as your
really like to
podcast
be up
producer, it is not helpful.
Podcast producer, is that your title now?
Yeah.
Whenever you make these rules, my life gets a lot less fun.
I'm not sorry about it.
I'm just stating that sometimes you're a fun suck.
Would you like me to state other facts
About what?
about your speaking habits
You said there were only
in the
two.
microphone?
So
okay, well, that was
So if I
want
to get rid of the pop filter, I have to not let my mouth do what it does. I will
Right.
just stop my salivary production.
Well, okay, first of all, you can't say peas as forcefully as you just said that one. Because it's going to make my life also a nightmare to edit out all of those.
Bossy.
I can show you where the peas come
I
out.
can show you
Okay.
the world. You did it to yourself. What's the next rule?
The next rule is, for some reason, your mouth gets real close and like drags out syllables. Like, I don't know how
Hold
to explain
on. Does this have anything to do with the pop filter, or are you just picking apart everything you don't like that I do right now?
It's not that I don't like that you do. It's that it makes my job difficult to then produce the sound in a way that's pleasant to the typical listener.
I think the rules of fair fighting would suggest that you only tackle one thing at a time.
I was tackling one thing. Your podcasting voice.
I speak to people a lot, and no one has problems with my voice or my active salivary glands.
You know why that is? Because I edit it all out.
No, when I talk to people in person.
Oh, in person?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll
but
just
that's
start going door to
different.
door and talking to people, and we just won't do the podcast.
You also don't do the thing that you do when I literally can't even imitate it when you but then you go into the next word and it sounds like it sounds like you're strained trying to say the next word.
I'm probably trying to think.
No. If you could hear it, you would know what I'm talking about. I can't imitate it though.
You know what? I'll just leave the damn pop filter on.
Oh, okay. We're going pro pop filter.
Mostly because I can't get it out of the holster without your assistance. So
Well, that's a great way to kick off our fair fighting episode, part 1.
fighting.
By fighting over the podcast for all to hear. So, what mic check do we have for this beautiful topic?
Well, it's really simple because it comes from Michael Bolton. So naturally, it's amazing.
Yes, obviously.
And it fits our topic very well. And it's also a very good shower song. Just going to put that out there.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Ready?
Go.
How can we be lovers if we
Nah.
can't be friends? How can we start over when the fighting never ends? Oh, baby, how can we make love if we can't make amends? How can we be lovers if we can't be friends?
Wow.
Whoa. Did you hear the Michael in that?
That was a long mic check, but all necessary
So necessary.
because you can't cut that song off.
No, it just has to go.
It just has to go. Well, thank you for mic checking with good old Michael Bolton. What is he, 80s?
like years old, or where did he
No.
come from?
His music.
He was popular in the 80s. He had long hair that was similar to Kenny G, and I did
Oh,
get him
Kenny G.
confused with Kenny G at times. In fact, I feel like it might have just been like his alter ego.
You want to hear something?
Sure.
When I pictured God, he had Michael Bolton's flowy hair. Maybe that's because of the King Triton in Little Mermaid. I thought he was a godlike figure as well. I don't know. I can't explain it really, but Michael Bolton, his head, his flow, his mullet, really.
I would love to unpack that in counseling.
Cool. Moving on. All right, so welcome back to another episode of A Life with Beth and Court. I'm Beth.
I'm Court.
And today we are doing part 1 of a 2-part podcast on fair fighting. How appropriate.
Ding, 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 ding. Can you put that sound in there? Like the bell ringing?
Yeah, I don't know why I'd need to, though. I mean, you just did it
Yeah,
perfectly.
that's true.
You're great at sound effects.
I so am. How can I best use that in my life?
Well, obviously by having a podcast and using them on there. So why is this such an appropriate topic right now?
Well, funny you should ask, Beth Ann. I was feeling inspired to share this for multiple reasons. The first reason came to me after you and I had our first inspiring conversation.
Argument.
And probably about, I would say, 6 months plus.
Fight.
Yeah.
We fought.
But like, how long was it before we just fought recently? 6 months?
I've got the memory of Dory, so I
we
don't know.
typically pride ourselves on the fact that we don't fight and we can usually communicate through things. But what we ended up discovering at the end of this was we both were completely overextended and exhausted.
It's the Rona.
Yeah.
I blame it on the Rona.
No, it more was we both were putting a lot of hours in to the course. We've been going really heavy on that for 6-7 months, and you also just started a new job. I have had things pick up at work, and
Because of the Rona.
oh my gosh. Okay, so anyway, I'm just going to summarize this right here. Basically, we got in a fight, which hasn't happened in a very long time, and I feel
Did you hear
Yes.
it? What is that? I don't know how to describe that when you
It's
say
me,
and.
It's me swallowing and pausing at the same time.
No, but that like ramp up into the word. I don't even know how to describe it. Did you hear it? Do you know how to do it? Replicate it. Just replicate it for me real quick.
I don't know how. I'm going to need you to focus and just
Okay.
ignore my salivary glands. Feel like we have to name them at this point because it's become such an ordeal. Anyway,
Betty and Beatrice?
had a... Where the hell did you come up with that?
I don't know.
So weird. You're distracting me. We had our first fight, not ever, but in a long time.
So basically we had a disagreement that we haven't had a disagreement in a very long time. We both got vocal and we got worked up. We were both under a lot of stress. We were overextended and decided that this actually would be the perfect time to discuss how not to fight and how to fight fair, because we're in an unprecedented time in our history. I don't know that even our parents or grandparents have ever been in this situation where people are basically being self-quarantined to their own homes. A lot of people are working from home or just laid off, and schools are shut down. So there's a lot of children in the home. There's a lot of adults trying to work side by side in their home. Not everybody has home offices set up. It gets stressful. It gets really stressful when you've got kids you're trying to homeschool, you're home with the dogs and cats, and then you're also home with your spouse or significant other. Everyone's trying to get on their way. Everyone's trying to adjust to a new lifestyle, and conflict may arise. So let's just go through. Fair fighting is a concept that you were first introduced to. You actually introduced me to it. So tell us a little bit about, because fair fighting is a term, right? Like that's not just like, we didn't make that up. That's like a style, right?
Yeah, so I actually found the term fair fighting from the Messages workbook, and it gives some resources on how to disagree with intimates. And basically, no two people are ever so compatible that they're not going to have conflicting desires, needs, opinions, and that we need to have clear, open discussion of our differences with a outline of how we can do that with keeping the peace.
So, what are the overall goals of fair fighting that maybe we've not been introduced to before when it comes to conflict?
Sure. So the main outcomes are to get what you need out of your relationship in a way that no one gets hurt or offended, and avoid alienating your partner, right? Because you guys are a team and you're on the same side. Handle conflict skillfully and quickly instead of avoiding and letting things build up. And then having just an overall deeper, more honest and respectful, intimate relationship.
If you're like me, conflict does not bring about good emotions. I do not like it and I will avoid it. And you just mentioned that one of the goals of fair fighting is to not avoid conflict. So what is the basis of people not liking conflict? So when you grow up feeling bad about conflict, what's behind that?
Well, it's what you just said, that we get conditioned in a certain way growing up. And I think the typical thing we're conditioned with is that conflict is bad.
Right.
It's scary, it's uncomfortable, it's overwhelming. And so, if you truly were to believe that conflict is bad, then the outcome of that would be every disagreement you ever have represents a failure within that communication.
Correct.
And furthermore, within that relationship. So, think about that for a second. If you are like, every time you get in a disagreement with someone, you failed, why would you want to step into that? Like, why would you go into conflict and feel good about it? So the goal is, once you normalize conflict, it becomes way less scary and you can minimize it and shut it down and just understand it's a part of normal communication.
So the goal is to normalize conflict, to understand that it is part of every healthy relationship. Conflict isn't bad, but we also need to understand how to navigate our way through conflict, because conflict can be bad. We're going to get to, in the second part of this, we're going to get to the exact tactics to use when you're utilizing fair fighting, that actual method there. But let's talk about first what unfair fighting looks like. Let's talk about what we want to avoid when we're in conflict with a loved one.
Well, not only avoid, I think the first step is just identifying. When I first read these, I didn't realize how many of them I actually did. And I also, even if there was awareness that I did those things, I didn't realize that it wasn't fair. So I think the first step is just having awareness, like, do you do these things? And then understanding how that might be unfair to the other person, because we preach awareness all of the time. That's the first step in anything, really.
Right. So what's one thing that we want to kind of identify or avoid when we're going into conflict so it doesn't become a bad experience?
Sure. So the first thing that you want to avoid is bad timing. So when I say bad timing, that can look like a lot of different things. It could be wanting to have a conversation when it's late at night and you're both exhausted from your workday. It could be really early in the morning. And if your partner is not a morning person, then that also is not a good time. It could be if one of us is working on an important deadline and the other is trying to have this conversation. So really just identifying what appropriate timing is and knowing your other and knowing when is best for them and when's best for you.
Which can be tough, because if you've got something that's kind of been building inside, you just want to hammer it out right now. Like, it's on my mind. I'm here. You're here. Let's break this down. I mean, I imagine if I'm working on a deadline and someone comes up to me and wants to like pick apart something I did 3 days ago, I'm going to be in a much worse place than if we had just set aside time where I wasn't stressed, I wasn't trying to focus on something else, and we just actually made intentional time to talk about it.
Right. You're setting yourself up and the situation for failure, essentially. And going back to what you said about, I feel like I need to talk about this right now. So, one, that's unfair because you're only considering your needs, not the other person's.
Right.
But the other thing to remember, which we talk about this a lot, is that's emotionally driven. So when you are feeling something so intensely and it has to happen right now, 9 times out of 10, that's your emotion driving it. And that's where you can check yourself and say, this emotion is telling me I need to have this conversation right this moment, but I'm going to try to bring myself out of this, calm down, go for a walk, and really walk through if logically right now is the best time. And I will fully admit this was my worst one, like out of all of the unfair tactics, because I was emotionally driven. So if I had something to say, I needed to say it now. Yeah, I know. I'm so much better at it now. It's hard to remember, but I would get it out because it made me feel better because I needed to feel reassurance and comfort. But now I know that I can calm myself with certain tools and that it's not just about me, it's about the other person as well.
This next one, speaking of worst ones, worst
You?
offenses, the next one is what I used to engage with, which is avoidance.
And avoidance can look like so many other things. I don't want to talk about this while I have this going on. I'm feeling really stressed right now. I don't want to talk about it. I have a headache. And
Which some of those can be fair.
for sure. But if you're using it as a tactic, like if I'm coming to talk to you for the third time about something and I'm trying to ask if it's a good time and you're always using that as a tactic, then it becomes avoidance as a tactic, not, oh, you're actually struggling with this. You're now using this as a tool to evade the conversation.
Right.
Number 3 is blaming. And we've talked about this a little bit in episodes before. Really just asserting yourself that you're right and the other person is wrong. And that typically sounds like a lot of you. So you never told me that we were supposed to be at our kids' play at this time. You never communicate with me when the bills are going to come out. So really just projecting that anger and blaming them for everything, which we know that when someone feels like they're being attacked, they shut down or they go into fight or flight. So really that's not an effective method and it's not fair.
Well, and this one, so blaming, and the next one are part of Dr. Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse too.
That's right.
So the next one is number 4 is tackling too many issues at once.
Right. So if I am upset with you about something, what's something I would get upset with you about?
Me not letting you.
Take my podcast filter off?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to talk to you about that. I feel like I really want to take my podcast filter off because it makes me feel like a superstar when I can hold the microphone, and we start to engage in conflict. And then all of a sudden I'm bringing up everything else about it. And when we record, you're always bossing me around. You're telling me what to do. And then outside the podcast, you're bossing me around in our relationship. Like really, you're just going and stacking all of these things on. And the goal with fair fighting tactics is that you don't build that pattern anymore, that you're going to work through one issue at a time and resolve it, or agree to disagree, which we'll talk about that more, but you're not bringing out your ammo. Like that's what I see that is like, oh, you want to go? Like here's my ammo in my backpack and I'm going to pull out any terrible thing you've ever done.
Well, because it's not like you're not trying to get to a solution at that point. You're just airing all your grievances.
Yeah. And how is that fair to the other person? And how is that helpful for them to be able to really be present and hear what you're feeling upset about? Like, how could you possibly have a rational conversation when you're like, cool, you just named 13 things and now I'm overwhelmed and I don't even know, like, you just think I'm a bad person.
Right.
I must be a bad person.
Well, because if you put yourself in their position and you're like, someone just told me, it started off by me putting my keys on the table and they said, why will you never put your keys back on the key ring? And also you never take the trash out. You don't do the dishes. You don't. And it just like becomes this laundry list. And you're like, well, you just think I'm an asshole. So I really don't even know like why are we even doing this?
This is my opinion. It shows that you put your energy into keeping score. So you're not really focused on being solution oriented or deepening your relationship with your partner. You are more focused on finding all of their faults.
Right.
And would you like that?
Well, I think this also, I would say that this one builds off of avoidance, right? Because if you keep avoiding the conflict and you keep not bringing the issues to the person, so that most of the time they're not even aware that it's an issue because you keep avoiding having to talk to them about it.
Right.
And I think the way that my mind used to process it is maybe if I keep just showing the other person the right way, that they'll get the point that I don't like when they do this. And that is a surefire way to frustrate you and really drive your relationship down a deep rabbit hole, because your anger is going to escalate and they're going to have no idea what's going on. And then all of a sudden, when one tiny thing comes out, you're like, and by the way, I hate these 67 things about what you do as well.
Right. Which is not fair.
Right.
The next one we have, which you're right, I numbered these notes very weird. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5.
I don't know. At some point, you just start it over again.
So we might be on 4, 5, 4, 5, but we'll type these out in the show notes.
Number 5.
The next one is obscuring feelings with anger. So we've talked about this in the past, that anger is a secondary emotion and it masks underlying emotions. So what this is saying is it's unfair to use anger as your mask. Now, this one's kind of tricky because I feel like unless you have that knowledge that anger is a secondary emotion, you don't know that.
Yeah, this is another struggle point for me because it's interesting because, like you said, once you learn to identify it, I think that this one blurred together for me. It started out with avoiding, and then it became tackling too many issues because I've been avoiding, and the issues have been building. And then when it finally comes out, I'm just pissed. And, you know, you and I, when we've had disagreements before, you'd say, like, why don't you tell me any of this? And I would say, I literally didn't know I felt that way until it just came out of my mouth.
Right. And anger was masking what you were actually feeling. And now this is one I would encourage you and your significant other to dig in on, because now that we both have that awareness, and the disagreement we got into last weekend, Saturday night. Yeah.
Yep.
Did you hear it?
Sure did.
Shit. When we got into that disagreement last Saturday, you were getting to the point of anger, and I had permission to call it out because we both know anger is a secondary emotion. So I was able to say to you, what is happening right now? Because this is anger, which means something else is going on. And so just having that awareness will bring you back to it and make you realize, okay, there is something deeper going on. And then I'm not taking it personally because I know that's masking something deeper. But like I said, unless you have that awareness, then it's really hard to understand you're not playing fair.
Yeah, I think it's also not even just the awareness, but like that training, because for me, if I don't go through therapy and if I don't do the things necessary to understand what those emotions are, I really am just emotionally blocked from it.
Right.
I really only can feel anger.
Right.
And so that's when you're like, what's going on? I'm like, I have no idea. I have
Right.
no idea what's going on right now. And that's where we have to use different techniques in order to say, like, okay, what could it be, you know, that's causing this anger, because we know anger is a secondary emotion. And then eventually it comes out. But, you know, like you said, we haven't had a disagreement in a really long time. And so it was a bit foreign. But then we got back into the cycle of, okay, there's anger. What does anger actually mean? So this one is a bit tough because you can identify it, but it kind of takes more work to actually undo this and know what the primary emotion is that you're feeling.
And we're going to talk about that in part 2. When we do talk about solutions, we will address what to do when that happens. So that's a really good point.
All right. So next up is
demanding personality changes.
Yeah, this one can feel hurtful.
Oh, I used to do this a lot before you, maybe a little bit with you in the beginning. My go-to, which this was coming from a place of being defensive, and I didn't know it was unfair at the time, was I need you to be more this. I need you to be more that. If you really loved me, then you would do this. If you really loved me, then you would do that. To come at someone and demand that they change their personality.
So, for instance, a good example of demanding personality changes, because we know that you and I are very different on the disc, right? And so when you come at me with something that's exciting, and I'm like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And you're like, I need you to stop being so analytical.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's how my mind works. So, and you can ask for what you need without asking them to change how they function, really, if that makes sense.
Well, and then you're asking them to bend to your needs because it's more convenient for you instead of you having to be present with it and understand that we're different people and we handle things in different ways and we behave in different ways. So really it's commanding that you're going to meet my needs because this is what I need from you.
Right. Which eventually, I mean, you guys, both people in the relationship kind of understand how the other one functions, and then they learn to not take it personally. And then you guys can flex to each other. And it's not always just one person flexing. I think that's when it gets dangerous, is when it's always one person being like, no, function in the way that works best for me.
Right.
Function in the way that I like you to function in, because then it's just being obedient to that other person.
Right.
All right. Next up is...
This is probably the worst one, I think. And I also used to do this. Man, how I've grown. The next one is making threats. So the reason those are so terrible is because they raise the stakes unnecessarily and they escalate anger. And again, being self-compassionate and thinking of someone who's really concerned or freaked out. Like one I've heard before is, I'm going to divorce you. And it sounds really hurtful and it is really unfair, but I think being cognizant that that person is panicking and that's the only way they know how to remedy the situation and protect themselves.
Yeah, they're at the end of their rope. They don't know how else to drive change,
right,
other than to threaten and say, I'll take the kids away from you,
Yep.
I'll divorce you,
Yep.
I'll kick you out of the house. There's all sorts of ways that really what it is it's a cry out of desperation.
Right.
I don't know what else to do to get it across to you that I'm really serious and I won't take this anymore.
Well, and an example of that threat that I did a long time ago, to get vulnerable for a second, I was dating someone who smoked and I was super against smoking and I knew how bad it was, and it just made me really upset that he would choose to do that. And I couldn't figure out a way to control it. And so I would make demands of like, I don't want you smoking. I need you to change. I need you to make this change. Wow. I guess I kind of used to roll them all into one. And so I told him, if you're not going to quit smoking, then we're going to break up. And it was an empty threat because I still loved him and wanted to be with him. But because of that threat, he was then threatened and felt like he couldn't be honest with me. And I found a pack of cigarettes in his jeans and a lighter and I lost it. But he had no choice in his mind because he's like, well, if you find out I'm smoking, you're going to break up with me. So now I'm just going to get better at hiding it.
Right.
So that's an example of how threats are really dangerous because it just escalates everything to a whole different level and it's not effective.
Well,
it
and
made things worse.
What you end up doing is creating a really unsafe culture in your relationship. And then
Yeah.
they don't feel, like you said, they don't feel safe to even tell you the truth.
Right.
So then it escalates a bad behavior into a bad behavior with lying.
Yeah.
Because now they don't want you to find out because they don't want the consequences of that threat. So then you find out that they've been lying to you, and then it escalates even further to what else have you been lying about? And that's something that you have to look at. You have to take responsibility for your part in creating a culture in your relationship that the other one feels like they can't be honest.
Right. And that's not to say that you can't set boundaries because
Yeah,
that
totally.
is very different. And again, in part 2 of this episode, we'll talk about fair fighting tactics and we'll go into that deeper. But I just don't want people to get that confused. Like, you can absolutely have boundaries, but there's a difference between that and making threats.
There's a right way to do it and a wrong
Yeah.
way to do it. And
Yeah.
this way of doing it, of making threats, is trying to make that other person obedient rather than working with them to make a positive change together and come to a solution that won't ultimately make them resentful.
Exactly.
All right. Next up, good segue, number 8.
Escalation. What this means is when things are moving toward calm, not relighting the fire. And that can be kind of confusing. So when we talk about fair fighting tactics on the other side, that will also make more sense because the goal is to get to a common resolution. But sometimes when we already have adrenaline surging or we are pissed about other things, one person, and I also used to do this because I loved a good fight. So when one person would be moving toward resolution and calm, or when someone would try to walk away to just say,
I did that.
I need it. Yeah, it wasn't as bad with you, but I do remember this because you were overwhelmed and you're like, I just need to take a break right now. And I was like, how dare you? We are having this conversation. How dare you walk away from me?
You were revved up and ready to go.
That's a really good example when you were walking away to try to de-escalate it. And I was pissed that you were walking away. So I tried to re-escalate it. And we've since discovered language around that. So we still will walk away and take breaks, but there's language that goes before it. Like, I need to cool off. And we'll talk about that too on the solution side.
Well, and some of it we discovered came from kind of what we had been taught. So you were taught, like, we don't walk away from each other. You stick it out. You get to the bottom of this. You don't walk away angry. We don't do this. We don't do that. And we had to get to the point where I was like, no, you don't get it. Like, it overwhelms me because you externally process and I internally process, and I feel attacked no matter what the words are. And I do need a break. I do need to walk away. And so again, lots of therapy later and lots of books and trainings and all of that. But it took us a little bit to figure this out. And once we did, we were like, oh, makes a lot more sense. There's language to use. There's understanding that people process differently, etc.
I also blame the movies. I feel like there was always someone storming out and slamming a door and screaming before the next scene. I blame the movies a little bit.
What movies were you watching?
I don't know, but that stands out very specifically in my mind. So I feel like I'll have to go back and look at things I watched when I was younger.
Also, Hollywood's not exactly the best place to take
but
fighting cues
that's
from.
also where we learn things from
Right.
the things around us.
All right, so the last tactic that we want to try to identify and avoid is somewhat similar to escalation.
Yes, unnumbered, last one, repetition.
Number 9. It's number 9.
Okay, thank you. Number 9 is repetition. So when you're looking at something that doesn't result in a mutual solution, so instead of agreeing to get to a point where you're trying to resolve something, you're just bringing it up over and over and over. So if we have agreed to disagree or we've set a solution in place, I keep bringing it up. And you're saying, we already talked about this. Like, why are we talking about this again? And you do hear that in conflict with couples. Like, why are you bringing this up again? We've already talked about it.
Right.
But when we go to episode 2 and we talk about fair fighting, we're going to talk about why it's so important that there's a solution or at least an agreement at the end, because it puts up a barricade to repetition.
I feel like people tend to repeat arguments when they're drunk because it's like you know how they say like a drunk mind, or
like they can pacify it when they're sober, but
Yeah.
when they're drunk, they bring
what's
up
that
things.
saying? Drunk word.
A drunken mind speaks a sober heart.
Oh, yeah. So basically that, where it's like when you actually talked about it, you're like, we came up with this mutual solution. And then if there's alcohol involved at all
And you're still pissed about it.
and you're still angry, that's where it's going to come up because you don't necessarily have that emotional regulation or that filter anymore. And so then you start bringing up all the things that piss you off again.
So bonus step, don't drink and fight.
Right? No kidding.
I'll just add that in
That's
myself.
like great number 10 to round this out is do not fight when you're intoxicated.
And that sounds really funny, but if we're being real about it, truthfully, sometimes that's the only time where people can find courage to have tough conversations, because it is so foreign. There is stigma around it and it is uncomfortable. So they're thinking, okay, I need to say something. Maybe this will give me the courage to say it.
But then, of course, when you're intoxicated, you don't have your wits about you. You have no filter.
You also say a lot of other things.
You say things that
we're suspecting based on how I behave on alcohol. I shouldn't say this.
I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of people who aren't on their best behavior when they're intoxicated. Yeah. So this hopefully has helped you identify some unfair fighting tactics that may creep up in your relationships. And this is part 1 of a 2-part series on fair fighting. We hope that this was helpful.
We're kind of being teases. There's a cliffhanger.
Oh, I thought you were saying it to me. I was like, I'm not teasing. That's the end of this episode.
Like usually we give them all the good stuff, but the reason we're separating it is because there is so much good stuff. So we want you to process the first part and then come back. And
this would be a heavy 2-hour episode if we tried to pack it all in one. So take a look at your relationships, take a look at your conflict styles, and just start by identifying if you see one of these, one or many of these 10 different unfair fighting tactics. As we always say, take what's helpful, leave the rest. We would love it if you'd come drop us a note on Instagram or Facebook at Life with Beth and Court. You can DM us or drop a comment on one of our posts, or jump on our email list and we send you a personalized note out every Saturday when we release the podcast. Just hit reply to that and we'd love to hear from you. One last thing before we end this episode, we do want to mention, we did touch on this in our email and on a social post, but we also want to say it here because we know there's a lot of listeners that may not see those other pieces out there. We did decide to postpone the launching of Exceptional Life Academy. And this was not an easy decision.
No, it made me sad.
Yeah, we struggled with it a bit, but here's the bottom line. We created this course for you. We created this course so that you could take your life to the next level. And that means that you're going to need some time to focus. You're going to need some time to carve out for yourself. And right now, life's crazy. We're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic. So
it's not fair because there's so many external circumstances that people might have not been prepared for or weren't expected to face that. So financially, there's a variable, mindset, there's a variable, working conditions, everything we've talked about on social and in our emails. So we just don't really feel like we would be setting you up for success when we know everyone's mindset is in a different place right now. And we want you to be able to be focused and do the work so you can get the results. So as much as it sucks that we had to postpone, we really feel like that's the best thing to do right now. So make sure you follow us and stay up to date. We do not have an official date release yet. We want to see how things play out, but we will keep you posted. And thank you for all of those of you who have reached out to us to see how we're doing with that decision and how it's going, because we've put our all into it. So we appreciate you.
It's going to be an amazing launch and we're going to roll with the punches when that comes along. But right now we really want you to focus on you and your family and adjusting to this new life as we try to flatten the curve with COVID-19 and our responses in that way. So if social distancing has you feeling lonely, reach out to us. You can email us or DM us on our social platforms. We'd love to hear from you. And until next Saturday, my friends, keep building your best life.
Bye, guys.